Well, greetings friends and welcome back to another episode of If I Can Do It, You Can Do It. Today we're installing a manual boot release for the back of the boot. Now, as you know, the Volkswagen T5 Transporter version, not minivan version, but the Transporter version doesn't actually come with any sort of internal boot release. So once you're in the back, you're kind of stuck and you have to climb over the seats or do something wacky to try and get yourself out of here. And even unlocking the van with your keys won't actually make any difference because the thing is still mechanically locked. Now, there are two basic ways of tackling this. The first is to piggyback the solenoid with an electrical switch, a momentary switch that you would then mount on your back plate wherever, somewhere. And once you press that switch, it would effectively activate the solenoid just like if you're on the outside of the van. But I've gone the other way, which is a mechanical switch, which is far cheaper. It's not going to fail on you. You don't need the battery to be turned on. You don't need the vehicle to be unlocked. You don't even need to have your keys on you. So this is essentially going to be handled the same way like an escape release you would see in the back of a sedan boot, where you might have a big handle that says escape. So we're sort of creating one here for the price of about $5. Here's what you will need. A bit of a cutting tool, doesn't really matter what you use. I've got the Gerber knife here with some Trojan blades. You will need some 8mm grommets. Now this is important because of the particular fix that you will see later on. The 8mm grommets actually fit in beautifully where I decided to put the holes. Your mileage may vary, of course, but this is what I did. I'm also using some starter cord, which is the black stuff in the middle. Any sort of cord really will do, some paracord or whatever you've got lying around, something that's fairly durable. And finally, the key to all of this are these wire rope grips, which you will see how I've employed them in a minute. If you want to get really fancy, you can also include some stretch loops or some sort of a grab handle or a release from a sofa or a bunch of other stuff that you can attach to the end of the rope. And finally, if you're doing it exactly like me, you will need this selection of tools as well. Your drill, your hammer, your scissors, something to pry it down with. This adjustable spanner is really handy for something I'll show you later. And this tiny wee little spanner to tighten down the wire grips. Very cute. Now, as you can see here, I've already created the fix because I wanted to make sure that it worked before I made this video. In short, you'll see that there is the starter cord that's connected to a mechanical release here. And it goes up through the door through a grommet here, which I will then put through the backing, the paneling that sits here, and then there will be the loop attached to the end just to make it all nice and pretty. But in order to show you why this works, let's take you through the anatomy of the door release. This is also important because it will show you that there's a couple of different ways that you could actually achieve this same outcome. So the first point is here, the white box and tube containing this rod. Now this is actually a solenoid which activates from the outside when you pull the handle to release the boot. It will essentially pull this handle up and that releases the mechanism inside, which is essentially what I'm piggybacking my mechanical release to. There's a couple of different things here as well that you need to know about. For example, this rubber stopper down here also acts as a cover for the emergency release. So if you pull this off, inside there is a mechanism where you can depress it with your finger and it will actually release the door mechanically as well. And here you can see that mechanism in a bit more detail. So if you put your finger in there and you depress that lever, that is what will release the door. Equally, the same thing happens when you pull on this rod, which is essentially what my cord is doing. That will also release the door. You can see that this happens because these two are effectively linked together with that piece of metal there, which is essentially the same mechanical release linkage. So in normal door operation, the door is currently locked, and if I pull the door handle, nothing happens from the outside. If I then unlock the door, it will click, and when I pull the handle, you'll see the solenoid activate. So again, broadly, there's two ways to tackle this. Either electronically by piggybacking onto the mechanism that activates the switch here, which I didn't want to do. I've seen a few people online have issues with it. Or obviously mechanically, just introduce something that will also pull up that rod in the same way that the solenoid does, which is exactly what I've done here, which is why this system works. Now, if we were to lock the car, it is now locked. You will see that the system still activates. So even from a locked vehicle, you can actually still get out even if all the doors are locked, because essentially this is activating the same override as the emergency release down in there. Now finally, while the panel is still off, we will talk about the cord itself. Now you see that I've run it here behind the wires, and then it goes up into the paneling behind the main panel. I've actually stuck a loose piece of this insulating material down the back there to protect it a little bit further. Obviously that will wear away with time. And then I have installed the 8mm grommet into this hole here. Now that's why you want to get an 8mm grommet if you want to do that, because it actually fits into these holes perfectly. Now these are not the same holes that the back panel uses to be attached to. That's these large holes here. So these small holes are actually all left alone. But the main reason I chose this hole here is because pulling on the wire essentially pulls the rod in the same direction as the solenoid would. So it's trying to mimic that movement and basically not wear out the components over repeated use. Now, a couple more quick things to cover, which is what we'll do with the trimming. So once the trim goes back on, I'll drill a hole exactly where this grommet is and introduce another grommet on the other side, on the actual paneling itself, to make it nice and neat. So effectively it will be a double grommeted hole, one from here on the bodywork and one from the outside. Now we'll talk quickly about the tool usage. So first of all, this adjustable spanner was used to go through the back and to essentially hold the grommet in place while I flattened the front of it. Now hopefully you have a better tool than what I had to do, which I had to use this countersink tool on my drill, essentially rotated backwards so that the cutting edge wasn't rotating into the vehicle, but essentially the back of the countersink tool was used to flatten down the grommet and pushed it in. Obviously I went at a low speed and just took my time and pushed it in to flatten it down and then hammered it into place. Yes, a very lo-fi solution, but you can see it did the job for all intents and purposes. And as I mentioned before, you can use whatever you want to finish it off. I'm just going to hang one of these loopy things and tie the starter cord to it, so essentially it will just hang down like this here. Now you might be wondering about the plastic cover that goes over the back of the windscreen wiper. So with the windscreen wiper cover fitted and pushed in, you'll see that the hole will just jut out from next to the windscreen wiper cover. You could, for safety if you wanted, install it there. Now there's obviously a clip holding a wire here which you may have to move or be careful of. But again, your mileage may vary. This is just the way I chose to do it. But because I'm going to be pulling the cord this way, it doesn't really matter that this right side of the grommet hole is slightly covered. Now right at the start of this video I said for about $5. I didn't have any of this material at home with me, so for me it probably cost me about 15 to 20, just because I had to buy, you know, a giant bag of grommets just for one grommet and stuff like that. But if you have stuff like this lying around, then obviously you could pretty much do it for $0 if you're willing to give it a bit of effort. For me personally, again, I'm not a very handy person, but I'm kind of getting there. It wasn't that hard a thing to do, and it just took a bit of patience and it was a little bit fiddly, but if you're willing to give it a bit of time, then you have a very effective boot release for next to no money at all. So, I hope you enjoyed that one. Please join me in the next one. Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, and do all the good stuff, and I'll see you in the next episode. See you guys.